A racist cop picks the wrong man to harass. Mike Tyson. A baton swings. But what happens next shocks the entire crowd. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of morning conversations filled Bridges Café, a warm and inviting coffee shop tucked into the heart of the city. It was the kind of place where people from all walks of life gathered, businessmen typing away on laptops, college students cramming for exams, and elderly locals who came for their daily dose of caffeine and small talk. Sitting at a quiet table near the window, Mike Tyson, dressed in a black hoodie and jeans, sipped his coffee in silence. The morning sunlight cast a soft glow over his powerful frame as he absent-mindedly flipped through the pages of an old book. Despite his legendary status, he carried himself with humility, blending into the cafe's cozy atmosphere. A young boy, no older than 10, tugged at his father's sleeve, his wide eyes locked onto Tyson with disbelief. "Dad, that's Mike Tyson," the boy whispered, his excitement barely contained. His father, a man in his late 30s, chuckled and gave his son an encouraging nod. "Go on, say hello." The boy hesitated before approaching, his small hands gripping a napkin as if it were a priceless treasure. Excuse me, are you really Mike Tyson?" Tyson lowered his book and smiled warmly. "That's me, kid." The boy's face lit up. Could you sign this for me?" he asked, holding out the napkin with trembling hands. Tyson chuckled, taking the napkin and scribbling his signature across it. "You a boxing fan?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "My dad says you're the greatest fighter ever." Tyson handed the napkin back with a grin. "Your dad's a smart man." The boy's father laughed, giving Tyson a respectful nod. "Appreciate it, champ." As the interaction unfolded, Officer Travis Ward stood at the cafe entrance, watching with a disdainful smirk. A veteran cop with a bad reputation, Ward had spent years patrolling the city with an iron fist, using his badge as a weapon of intimidation rather than protection. His prejudices ran deep, and to him, a man like Mike Tyson, a powerful black man sitting comfortably in a cafe full of white customers, was unacceptable. "Great," Ward muttered under his breath. "Another one loitering where he doesn't belong." His uniform stretched tight across his burly frame as he stepped into the cafe, his presence an immediate disturbance to the warm atmosphere. The hum of conversation dimmed slightly as customers glanced up at him, sensing the shift in energy. With slow, deliberate steps, Ward made his way toward Tyson, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. As he stopped beside Tyson's table, he pulled off his sunglasses, revealing cold, calculating eyes that burned with prejudice. "You got a problem?" Tyson asked casually, sensing the hostility before a word was even spoken. Ward sneered. "Yeah, I do. You don't belong here." Tyson arched a brow, setting down his coffee. "That's so?" Ward crossed his arms, puffing out his chest in an attempt to assert dominance. "We don't tolerate loitering in this part of town." His tone dripped with condescension, and his eyes flicked to Tyson's worn hoodie, as if judging him based on his appearance alone. Tyson let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "I ain't loitering. I'm drinking my coffee, same as everyone else." Ward leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "We both know people like you don't just sit and drink coffee. You're making folks uncomfortable." A tense silence fell over the cafe as customers glanced nervously at the scene unfolding before them. The cafe's owner, Clara Ramirez, a strong-willed woman in her 50s, wiped her hands on her apron before stepping forward. "That's enough," Clara said firmly, her eyes locking onto Ward's. "Mike is a paying customer, same as anyone else here." Ward scoffed, his lip curling. "Lady, I don't think you understand who you're defending. You really want someone like him in your cafe?" The customers bristled at the blatant racism, and a few murmurs of disapproval rippled through the room. Tyson exhaled slowly, his patience wearing thin. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't about to be bullied out of a place where he was welcome. "I don't think you understand," Tyson said, his voice carrying an undeniable weight. "I ain't going nowhere." Ward's eyes darkened with fury. His hand twitched toward his baton, his jaw clenching as he took a step closer. "You're testing me, Tyson." Tyson leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. "No, officer, you're testing yourself." The cafe buzzed with anticipation, every eye in the room locked onto the confrontation. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. Clara, sensing the moment spiraling toward disaster, took a step between them. "I suggest you leave, Officer Ward," she said coolly, "before you embarrass yourself any further." Ward's face turned red with anger, but he knew all eyes were on him. He had expected Tyson to cower, to comply. But this wasn't just any man. This was Mike Tyson. And as the storm of conflict brewed, the cafe braced itself. Something was about to explode. The atmosphere in Bridges Cafe had shifted from warm and inviting to thick with tension, a storm of unease hanging over the air like a dark cloud ready to burst. Customers clutched their coffee cups, some frozen mid-sip, others gripping their phones tightly, their eyes darting between Mike Tyson and Officer Travis Ward, the arrogant cop who now loomed over him. The cafe's owner, Clara Ramirez, stood behind the counter, her hands clenched into fists, her face dark with anger. She had seen racist officers harass people before, but not in her cafe, not in a place where everyone was welcome. Yet Ward's sneer remained unwavering, his voice thick with hostility. "I said get up and leave. I won't say it again." Tyson slowly set down his coffee, the ceramic cup clicking softly against the table. His hands rested flat on the surface, his movements controlled, measured, like a lion deciding whether to pounce. He raised his eyes, locking onto Ward's with the weight of a man who had seen and fought far worse. "I ain't moving." The words hung in the air, bold and unshaken. The cafe seemed to collectively inhale, bracing for the inevitable. Ward's face flushed red, his authority challenged in a way he wasn't used to. He leaned in, his breath heavy with disdain. "I don't give a damn who you think you are," he spat. "This ain't a place for people like you." A murmur rippled through the cafe. "People like me?" Tyson's voice was low, but there was thunder rumbling beneath it. Ward smirked, his eyes filled with mocking arrogance. "You know exactly what I mean. Thugs, hoodlums, wannabe tough guys." The cafe fell into dead silence. Tyson exhaled slowly, his patience wearing thin. He had spent a lifetime dealing with men like this, cops who thought their badge made them invincible, who thought they could talk down to people, break them, simply because the law was on their side. "Officer," Clara cut in sharply, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mike is my customer, and you're harassing him. You need to leave." Ward snapped his head toward her, his smirk replaced by a scowl. "Lady, you stay out of this. This is police business." "No," Clara shot back. "This is my business, and you're trespassing." The cafe erupted into hushed murmurs, customers nodding in agreement, some even pulling out their phones. Ward noticed the cameras, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. His hand hovered over his baton, his fingers curling around the handle. "I don't like repeating myself, Tyson. You're leaving, now." Tyson's eyes flickered toward the baton, his lips curling slightly in a way that made Ward's stomach tighten. "You gonna hit me?" Tyson asked, his voice calm, almost daring. Ward's jaw clenched, his anger bubbling over. "You want to find out?" Then, in one violent motion, he ripped the baton from his belt and swung it toward Tyson's shoulder. A sharp gasp rang through the cafe. The baton slammed down. But it never connected. With the grace of a champion, Tyson's hand shot up, catching the baton mid-air. The force of Ward's swing stopped instantly, the shock rippling through his arm. The cafe erupted into a stunned silence. Ward's eyes widened, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. His arm trembled as Tyson held the baton in a grip like iron, completely unmoving. The veins in Ward's forehead bulged with frustration. He tried to yank the baton back, but Tyson's grip didn't budge. Then, Tyson tightened his hold. A sharp crack echoed through the cafe as the baton splintered under the sheer power of his grip. Ward stumbled backward, his eyes wild with disbelief. The cafe erupted. Customers cheered, their energy shifting from fear to awe. Phones flashed, recording every moment. Tyson stood up slowly, his massive frame towering over Ward, his eyes now dark with quiet fury. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Tyson rumbled. Ward's breath quickened, his mind scrambling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. His arrogance wavered, and for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Clara stepped forward, her arms crossed. "I told you to leave, officer." The cafe echoed her demand, voices rising in unity. Ward's hand shot to his radio, his fingers fumbling to call back up. But before he could speak, a new voice rang out, sharp and authoritative. "Enough." The cafe froze as another officer stepped inside. Sergeant Elliot Hayes, a seasoned officer with graying hair and a hardened gaze, strode forward, his expression dark and unreadable. His eyes flicked to Ward's trembling hands, then to Tyson, standing tall, unwavering. "What the hell is going on here?" Hayes demanded. Clara crossed her arms. "This officer, your officer, came in here harassing my customer for no reason. He swung a baton at an innocent man. That's what happened." Hayes's jaw clenched. His gaze settled on Ward. "Is that true?" Ward stammered, his bravado cracking apart. He wasn't supposed to be here." "Shut up!" Hayes' voice was lethal, each word sharpened to a point. Ward's face drained of a color. "Give me your badge and gun," Hayes ordered, his tone final. Ward's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I said now." Ward's hands trembled as he removed his badge, his career ending in front of an entire audience. The cafe broke into applause. Tyson, still standing tall, exhaled slowly, his fists finally unclenching. Hayes turned to him. "Mr. Tyson, I'm sorry for what happened here today." Tyson gave him a nod. "You did the right thing." The cafe roared with approval, their faith in justice momentarily restored. Tyson turned to Clara, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "Think I'll have another coffee?" She grinned. "On the house." The tension in the cafe dissolved, replaced by relief, admiration, and respect. Mike Tyson had stood his ground, and in doing so had shown everyone what it meant to fight for what's right. The cafe had turned into a pressure cooker of tension, every eye locked onto the unfolding confrontation between Mike Tyson and Officer Travis Ward. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the acrid taste of impending conflict as the arrogant officer, now clearly outmatched, staggered back in disbelief. His chest heaved, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But his pride wouldn't allow him to retreat. Not yet. Not in front of an audience. Tyson, however, stood like an immovable force, his massive frame exuding both power and restraint. He had faced many challengers in the ring, but there was something uniquely satisfying about standing his ground against bullies outside of it. "You messed with the wrong guy today," Tyson said, his voice low and lethal, carrying the weight of undeniable truth. Ward's face twitched with a mix of fear and rage, but it was his ego, not logic, that pushed him forward. His hands clenched into fists, his shaking breath betraying his faltering confidence. I'm giving you one last warning, Tyson," Ward sputtered, attempting to salvage his authority. Tyson didn't move. "That's funny," he said, voice calm. "I was just about to say the same thing to you." The crowd's hushed murmurs swelled, their phones still recording every second, broadcasting the spectacle to an audience far beyond the walls of Bridges' Café. Ward's pride snapped. With a frustrated growl, he lunged forward, throwing a wild, desperate punch at Tyson's jaw. A mistake. Mike didn't move. He didn't have to. With the grace of a veteran fighter, Tyson's head tilted just enough to let the punch whoosh harmlessly past his face. Before Ward could even register what had happened, Tyson's fist flashed forward, not a full punch, but a short, controlled strike to the center of Ward's chest. The impact was instant. Ward staggered backward, gasping, his feet scrambling to find balance. It wasn't the kind of punch designed to break a man. It was the kind designed to remind him who he was dealing with. The cafe erupted. Customers cheered, gasped, and murmured in shock, their voices a wave of excitement and justice. Tyson didn't press forward. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, watching, his presence alone more intimidating than anything else. Ward, now fully panicked, reached for his taser, his fingers fumbling as he struggled to regain control. But before he could even pull it from his belt, "Enough!" The word cut through the chaos like a gunshot in the night. Sergeant Elliot Hayes, a man built like an old war veteran with silver-threaded hair and a no-nonsense expression, had entered the cafe. His piercing blue eyes surveyed the scene, locking onto Ward's disheveled stance and Tyson's unwavering composure. His jaw hardened. He had seen enough. "Ward," Hayes said, his voice booming with command. "What the hell are you doing?" Ward, his breath still labored, turned, trying to regain his composure. Sir, I was..." Hayes raised a single hand, cutting him off. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth." Clara Ramirez, the cafe owner, stepped forward, her voice steady but seething. "The truth?" she said. "Your officer barged in here, harassed a paying customer, and attacked him. That's the truth." Hayes's eyes darkened, flicking between Ward's humiliated expression and the faces of the customers, their silent condemnation heavy in the air. A man from the crowd held up his phone, the screen lit with a recording of the incident. "We've got it all on video, Sergeant. Everything." The weight of evidence slammed down like a gavel. Hayes exhaled slowly, his decision clear. "Ward," he said, his voice like iron, "give me your badge and gun." A chill swept through the cafe. Ward's face went pale. What? "You heard me." Hayes stepped forward, towering over him now. "Badge, gun, now!" Ward's fingers trembled, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His mouth opened, then shut. He was cornered, and he knew it. With agonizing slowness, he unclipped his badge, his jaw tightening with the unbearable sting of humiliation. He pulled his gun from its holster, handing it over with shaking hands. The cafe exploded into cheers. Justice had been served. Ward, now stripped of everything, stood frozen, his mind still struggling to process what had happened. His eyes flicked back to Tyson, who hadn't moved an inch, watching him with the quiet authority of a king who didn't need a throne to command respect. Hayes turned back to Tyson. "Mr. Tyson," he said, his voice steady with respect, "I am deeply sorry for what happened today." Tyson nodded slowly. "You did the right thing," he said. "That's what matters." The cafe erupted into applause, not just for Mike, but for everyone who stood up for justice that day. Clara clapped her hands together, her voice bright with relief. "Well," she said, "I don't know about you, Mike, but after all that, I'd say you deserve another cup of coffee on the house." Tyson smiled, finally allowing himself a moment of peace. "You know what, Clara? I think I'll take you up on that." As he sat back down, the cafe slowly returned to normal, but the impact of that day would linger forever. Mike Tyson had stood his ground, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. And that made him a champion in ways far beyond the boxing ring. As the weight of public judgment bore down on former Officer Travis Ward, he stood frozen in disgrace. His badge and gun, symbols of power he had abused for too long, had been stripped away, his humiliation now complete. The cafe's patrons murmured among themselves, shaking their heads at the fallen man who had once carried himself with an air of untouchable authority. Mike Tyson, the unshaken storm, remained composed, his towering presence both a warning and a reminder. Justice had been served. Sergeant Elliot Hayes, his steely gaze fixed on Ward, exhaled sharply. "You had your chance," he muttered, his voice a cold finality. "Now get out of my sight." With a hollow nod, Ward turned, his face red with shame, his eyes avoiding the crowd that had witnessed his downfall. He walked out of the cafe like a shadow retreating from the light, the heavy silence around him feeling heavier than any prison cell ever could. And then the dam broke. A roar of cheers and applause filled the cafe, shaking its very walls. People clapped, some whistled, others thumped their fists on tables in approval. The cafe's owner, Carla Bennett, her apron dusted with flour, wiped a tear from her cheek, her face glowing with gratitude. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, Mike," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You stood up for all of us." Tyson, always a man of few words, nodded with a small smile. Bullies fall fast when you push back. A young boy, barely 10 years old, shuffled forward, his small hands gripping a napkin. His eyes, wide with admiration, shimmered as he stared up at Mike. Mr. Tyson?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyson crouched, his expression softening. "Yeah, kid." The boy, clutching the napkin like a sacred relic, thrust it forward. Could you sign this?" Mike chuckled. "Of course." With a few swift strokes, his signature graced the napkin. The boy beamed, his fingers running over the ink as if he had just received a treasure beyond measure. But then, with hesitant curiosity, he asked, "How did you not get scared?" Tyson studied him for a long moment before answering. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," he said. "It means you do what's right anyway." The boy's face lit up, his small chest puffing with newfound courage. The cafe had returned to normal, people placing new orders, conversations buzzing once more, but the energy remained electric. This moment would not be forgotten. As Tyson stood up, Carla patted his shoulder. "Coffee's on the house for life, champ." Tyson grinned. "Now that's a reward I can get behind." Outside, the sun bathed the city in golden light, a world unchanged. But for the people inside Bridges Cafe, the day had shifted something deep in their hearts. Justice had been won, and courage had left its mark. Lesson and message from the story. In today's world, standing up against injustice is more important than ever. Mike Tyson's confrontation in the cafe reminds us that silence enables oppression, but courage dismantles it. No matter how powerful someone appears, abusing authority comes with consequences when people unite against wrongdoing. The cafe owner, customers, and even the senior officer proved that change happens when good people take action. Whether facing discrimination, bullying, or corruption, never back down from what is right. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe Undercover Insights channel.